Hello, and welcome to the October episode of Tambellini Group's Top of Mind podcast. I'm your host, Liz Farrell. In this episode, we're talking about the role technology teams play in enabling teaching and learning. And I couldn't think of a more perfect guest to discuss this with than Alison Robinson, who serves as Associate Vice President and Deputy CIO of the Division of Information and Technology Services at California Polytechnic State University in San Luis Obispo. Now, Alison has served in this role at Cal Poly for nearly 4 years, transforming the institution's IT division to a modern service-based model, leading an ongoing cloud transformation, and spearheading the move to a new cloud-based LMS system. These are just a few of the areas where Alison has a lot of expertise, having served in various technology leadership roles at the universities of Maryland, South Florida, and Wisconsin-Milwaukee. Welcome, Alison.
Hello, thank you for having me. I'm looking forward to our discussion.
Yes, me too. Thank you so much for joining us. Before we dive in, I wanted to kick things off by setting the scene. Can you tell me just a little bit about your role in your institution?
Sure. Cal Poly is about approaching 22,000 students at our SLO campus. Our motto is learn by doing, so we have a very hands-on, engaged pedagogy for our instruction. We have been named Best in the West by U.S. News and World Report for approaching 30 years now. And
Wow.
as an organization, we just recently centralized our IT on campus. So we're a comprehensive enterprise IT organization, or we're growing into one at least. My role as Associate Vice President and Deputy CIO is to run IT operations for campus. I came, as you mentioned, about being a cloud-forward campus and transitioning from our old kind of structured by the technologies we serve into an IT service management organization. And we take a look at people, process, tools, and data to do that transition from those old structures to service management organization.
That's great background. And I want you to tell our listeners a little bit more about this IT service management model, because it's so relevant to what you did with the LMS systems. I was interested when I initially proposed the topic of this podcast to you as supporting teaching and learning, you had said, I don't think that's the right way to describe it. It's more like we're enabling teaching and learning. Can you explain the difference between supporting and enabling?
Yeah, great question. So I think the difference between those two represents that change in modernizing your IT organization. I've done a version of this at 3 different institutions. It looks a little different each place because it's a framework, not a checklist. But I'd once read research where it talked about IT as a butler of service to campus as a model that has to go. It has to be about partnerships. That IT comes to the table with business, and the business is what needs to happen, and IT is how. And it's a dialogue and a partnership back and forth about how you make that happen. There may be things that the business wants, but technically it isn't possible until perhaps another project needs to be done. And that's the understanding of, where do we want to get and how do we get there, and that partnership of making that happen. So I try and resist that being the butler and I need a tool and we bring a tool. We try and look at this as what are we trying to accomplish here? As a matter of fact, when you're becoming a service organization, the number one most strategic question in what you do is who do you serve and what are they trying to accomplish? And I work with my teams on this, and before they are more oriented to service organizations, I'll get things like tools like Linux. I'm like, other than researchers, Linux is often a tool we need to provide service. It is not the actual service of what we provide. And that's usually a little confusing to people. So I like to use the analogy of when you go into a restaurant. Probably most everything on that menu, a spatula was used to make sure that could be delivered to you, that your hamburger could be delivered to you. But nowhere on that menu does it say spatula. So we need to separate those tools we need to provide what's on the menu. In our case, in IT, our menu is a service catalog. So that's one of my first focuses as well. If faculty and staff come to us and say, hey, what can I get? Like our menu, our service catalog should be easy to understand, common language, templated, clear as to who can use it, how you get it, and how it's supported. So those are usually some of my first focuses in these efforts to modernize and become a partner in IT rather than a butler.
Yes, and I had like also when we had previously discussed that analogy, you had said you never see spatula on a menu. You see beautiful descriptions of the foods you're getting and the ingredients, but not the tools that were used to make them. And taking that approach towards faculty or any other groups you work with on campus is so important because of they don't necessarily need to know the work behind the services that you're providing, just how they're going to get them, as you said, to that goal. So you had told me when you started at Cal Poly, your initial focus was moving the data center off premise and onto the cloud. And the second was creating the service model. So the ITS don't regard themselves as these butlers or who are fulfilling wishes. But once those transitions were in hand, you had turned your attention to Cal Poly's LMS system. And can you talk a little bit about what you found?
When I arrived, we were using an open source LMS that was being hosted on-prem. The equipment was aging. It was also heavily modified. So part of the cloud questions you ask yourself, there's a lot of questions when you work with me. One of the questions you ask yourself when you're moving the data centers, first and foremost, do we even need to do this anymore? Well, with an LMS, yeah, we did. Secondly, does it have to be on-prem to be able to provide? Some things have caching issues, for example, and it's not fast enough to be in the cloud and has to stay on campus. Certainly the LMS is not one of those situations, and that's been well proven because there's many LMSs in the cloud to be had now. The third question I asked is what we're using today, what's best for us today and looking forward. So will it take us into the future? And honestly, there were some questions about whether this was the best thing for the campus to be using. So I operationally run the governance groups for campus, and there's a learning and research work group. So we talked with them about, do you think this is what we need today going forward? And started that conversation there. And they were interested because a number of the faculty that were in that committee had used other tools like Canvas before and said that was a good question. We should explore that. We know that students have much higher expectations to engage with the LMS mobilely, for example. I mean, I've seen students on their phones doing math work, not reading, like actually doing. I couldn't. Of course, I'm Gen X, so they just had very different expectations around mobile engagement in the LMS, and all of us are concerned about accessibility. And there's definitely on the market now things that are far more accessible. So we took a look at the gaps between what they like and what they currently have, and the answer was maybe it doesn't service as much. Let's explore this.
Yeah, and I think that often now in the post-March 2020 era, it probably seems like the most obvious thing in the world to move from an on-premise to a cloud-native LMS system for those issues of security, scalability, and just general ease of use and updates to functionality. But you started this process, as you mentioned earlier, in fall 2018. And even today, those advantages and benefits aren't necessarily understood by faculty or other instructors. So how did you go about working with your peers on the other side of the fence to determine what direction that they wanted to go in?
Yeah, so again, the governance group was one of my primary places to work. There's also a Center for Teaching and Learning Technology group that supports faculty in what they do. Very, very hands-on. They're almost, if you look at it in tiers in support of IT, they're more tier one and directly engaged with faculty. So it was important. They have membership on this faculty committee as well. And so there's a well-rounded discussion of a change here and the impacts, and is it important? So we literally I said, is it meeting your needs now, and will it into the future? And it's really important to ask that second question, because is it meeting your needs today? I mean, yes, right? People were functioning on it. I wasn't having an outcry from campus to say time to change LMS, but I knew I had technical risk an aged infrastructure, and fear of some of our stuff starting to fail. Not sure that it would continue to scale as more faculty came on board. So I knew from a technical perspective, we had to look at something. So, but when you ask that second question about, and will it take you into the future, that starts changing the focus. And with systems as big as this, you really do have to look into the future. And when we got done with exploring that question as a faculty governance group, they said, yeah, we should look at something different. And they were interested in replacing the tool, but they were also interested in, the new features and functions, the people process tools, how would this modernizing the environment? And they were very interested in that.
You had also mentioned there had been some pushback to that, even though you had a lot of people on board. When you were asking those questions about will this take us into the future, can you talk about a little bit of that, the skepticism around that?
It's interesting because I have certainly had technical projects with pushback. This project did not feel like that. I had some good questions and that's fair. It's always fair to question. For example, people didn't understand the magnitude of the equipment it takes to run this. The question was, well, couldn't we just buy a new server? And so I knew that I had a gap between people's understanding of what it took to run this versus the reality of what it did. So I said to the CIO, you have a problem if I do a little bit of videotaping in the data center. So I literally walked in, and you go through a door and it goes from me talking to all of a sudden this rush of the air conditioning and all the electrical hum, and went in and said, this is what we're talking about. This is the infrastructure that's aged. And this is why I'm asking us, will this take us into the future? Because these 4 racks of equipment with all the lights flashing and backups and duplication and, the humming of the UPS and the air conditioner, I said, this infrastructure isn't needed if we move to the cloud. So this is a great time to ask, do the work to get new equipment here, do the work to move it to the cloud, or take time to look for a new LMS. But even moving it to the current to the cloud meant there was going to be work. Changing systems meant there was going to be work. I asked, which work is more productive for you? And so I guess that resonated. I understand it got a little more airplay on campus than I had expected. But at the end of the day, we came forward and we started that in the fall of 2018. And I believe we got funding the summer of 2019 is when we started the procurement and implementation process.
I love that creative approach of let me go in, sort of be this gonzo journalist in the server room, showing them physically what that involved. And as you mentioned, it seemed to resonate and sort of went viral in its own way on campus, which I think shows sometimes you need that visual just to make it clear to people. And it seems like after that, you got the approval and the buy-in from everyone who may have just been asking that question, like, why can't we just keep the system? And why can't we just keep it, build more servers or buy more servers or anything like that? But then, so since you had started that, can you tell us where you were at when the pandemic hit in this process?
Yeah, so Cal Poly is on quarters. And so when the pandemic hit for us, in terms of many semester schools were well into the flow, probably somewhere around spring break. We were actually transitioning from our winter quarter to our spring quarter. So, I was very lucky actually to get about 2.5 weeks to make this transition. We had a very small beta group in the winter quarter, and we're going to make it a little bit bigger in the spring quarter. But as we rolled forward, everybody go home and we're going to do this from home. I worked with leadership on campus and said, if you're going to use an LMS, I want you to go ahead and use Canvas, not our past system. That is eventually going to go away. And I'm not sure it's going to scale to the size we would need. Between you and me and everybody in this podcast, it would have never taken the whole load. Our on-prem would have never taken the whole load of demand for LMS. So we went from a couple hundred people in the Canvas LMS beta group and provisioned, I think the number was around 27,000 people into Canvas, all the courses, all the enrollments. And so no one had to ask, it was just there. And we got that done. I mean, that didn't take 2.5 weeks. That was was tech that was done. We just had to change the parameters to the entire enterprise and made that happen. And so we were ready to go for spring quarter with every course that was being offered on campus.
What I think must be particularly vindicating about that is it sounds like asking that question of, not only is this working for you now, but will it serve us in the future, puts you in a great position to be well prepared for this time, because the future abruptly became the present. But instead of gradually adding more beta testing groups, as you mentioned, you had to add about 20,000 users. How did that go?
Like, I don't know if you heard my snap of the fingers. Honestly, that's so, we're enterprise, and a service organization focuses on automation because automation makes things happen consistently and gated at the time it's supposed to happen. So we had built the integration to move the course information from our student information system into Canvas. We just had to do that at a bigger scale. So, it wasn't like we sat down and began creating that process. That was something we built as we implemented the LMS, and it was ready to go. Yes, I like to say, there's professional knowledge and experience meets serendipity, right? The timing was perfect. The story could have been very, very different, but just with how things went forward and driving that future forward, looking not currently, but future, what do we need to accomplish? Opportunity met preparation, and it was a good thing.
There was another serendipitous occurrence that you had mentioned before about these virtual labs.
Yeah, so we were working on, the power of cloud allows for you to scale. You consume the resources that you need when you need them. And so one of the things we were looking at was building up the virtual computer lab at Amazon Web Services. That's where we're moving our data center. And so we had a beta that we had run with building out the virtual computer lab. We had worked with a couple faculty members on some statistical packages that their classes used, and we're kind of beta testing to see how this goes. So when we were all told to go home, I was in that leadership meeting, and it was communicated to deans that if there's any aspect of a course where a student needs to come to campus to complete the coursework, we're not going to be able to offer that course. Well, at a Polytechnic, you think of CAD and GIS and MATLAB and all those kind of technologies that enable a STEM education. We're in a physical computer lab. And I said, okay, well, we've got this virtual lab, and we tested out with a couple faculty members. If you need software in that virtual lab to conduct class, you're going to need to let me know. We're going to set up a process. We're going to reach out to you. I might need some help with prioritization, but we're going to work on this. Now, that 2.5 weeks was hardly long enough to do everything, but we got the biggest demand things built and in there and available. Those that within that first week or so of that classes had started. And so yes, we ended up that technology saved us from having to cancel a number of classes. And of course, that's important for students to be able to continue their education and graduate on time. That's important for the revenue streams of the university. And so we were very, very fortunate. That one was a little more nerve-wracking. We went from a couple hundred there to 27,000 as well. But at that scale, Canvas is well tested at very large universities. This was something we built. So we're like, and we had to learn a couple lessons along the way. Students who had poor network connectivity, they didn't have the best experience. Things could be jerky to almost too frustrating to work with. But if you had good connectivity, that we used it. It was used heavily the whole time we were remote.
Yeah, especially being, as you mentioned, heavily focused on STEM education with all those engineering courses and other things that require that type of software that the virtual labs allow. But I'm curious to hear about how this was for faculty, because they're being asked to embrace a lot of change quickly. And even though they understand why, it's not just a matter of scaling for them.
Right. No, and I have to say the faculty were incredible. They really stepped up to take seriously the questions of, is this the best of the future, to select it. When it came time that we went remote and we had to start using it, we were just all in such a different place in life. There wasn't another option. We had to figure this out. So, faculty we were working diligently the whole world was demanding cameras at that time, just to get them in and get them in the hands of the faculty and they worked to get it set up. When they first started, it was just getting used to being in front of the camera. Remember when there was no Zoom? Well, yeah. Getting used to that to where we are now. And really, we've gone from in front of a camera and just kind of trying to be comfortable to, I've got faculty with green screens behind them. It's like a little television studio. We had a situation on campus where the provost enabled those faculty that were comfortable, for example, with the LMS, to be in a lead role and support other faculty within their colleges and courses, and actually, gave them the role and the expectation and a stipend to be able to support other faculty in this. People just really came together to figure out how to make the best of a very, very difficult situation. So I'm really proud of them. They grabbed it and they're taking it next level.
And I also understand you have a strong background in teaching. You had mentioned being one of the first, maybe even the first certified computer science was it 405?
It was a 405 license in the state of Wisconsin. I think I had to be one of maybe the top 10 in the state to have had that license. It was very, very early on. So yes, I have both the technical, I went on for my master's degree in computer science. So I have the content of computer science, and I have the skills of how do you convey knowledge to another person? Like, how does that structure? What does that look like? And I think that's really served me well in my career in IT, because as a leader, I have people and they need to deliver an outcome, and you help structure what that outcome looks like. And you check along the way to make sure that's happening. Well, for those of you who teach, I've just described curriculum. I've just taught assessment, defining outcomes, preparing students. And so those are some key things to teaching that served me well in IT. And so I know, for example, the knowledge base and our service catalog, how important it is for those things to be written. Not that other IT people can read it, because that's not who's reading those. It's our customers. On a campus, customer may not be the word, but really they are. They're our faculty. They're our staff. They're our students. And so to me, one of the first things in an IT organization going into a service management organization is making sure you create this one front door to service, and the information you need and the people who can help you are right there. You don't have to know who to call, or is it this number, or is it this email address? This number, this email address, this website. Any one of those three will serve your need. So that's a high focus in when I start undertaking these modernization efforts.
I think having that understanding of what it's like to be in a classroom and teaching, even your background, you had mentioned you've done a lot of fitness instructing. You're a walker teacher. You're telling them about the tools they can use, like cameras that will follow their voice around a classroom when they're doing hybrid and other things. And another particularly important insight that you mentioned to me is understanding the difference between the online and the in-person pedagogy of teaching, rather, in those two formats. And can you talk a little bit about that? Because you, in addition to being impressed with the faculty, took the tools and ran with them. You also mentioned to me there was more of a thoughtful, not just technical understanding that they developed in a lot of their classes, where they changed their approaches and utilization of the tools and even the formats of lectures or other type of learning engagement activities to meet that remote environment. Can you tell us a bit about that?
Yes, I am a walker teacher. I was sure that when we were looking for webcams in classrooms, that it was one where the camera would follow the teacher, because I'm one of those that cannot stand still when I teach. So yeah, that's important to understand how people work and make sure the tools that we have enable how they work to the greatest extent possible in a classroom, and all the different types of teaching and learning that occur there. But yeah, I mean, initially everybody was just trying, okay, I've got this camera, is it running? Can I get logged into Canvas? How do I upload this? How do I start it was very much that level one, just how do you make these things work? And that's what we didn't have a long timeline to work with. But then people started figuring out how to use these tools to meet their pedagogy, right? I remember one of our faculty in the dance department did a video that she shared out with the university on good stretches to do when you're sitting in front of Zoom all day. How could you get up and step away and in a 2-foot space do these stretches, right?
I mean, I think I need that.
Yeah, exactly. But they all started they started thinking of others too and helping in that way. But as they got comfortable with, I know how to do this and this is there, then they could start changing. Maybe not even, because our quarters are 10 weeks, and so that first 10 weeks was really making sure you got the content delivered. But people started thinking from their pedagogy and how could I be more creative in doing this. In some cases it might be it's all this work that you have to read or do or research before you come to the online lecture, and then there's very specific modules that are executed towards that pre-learning. It's very dependent on the pedagogy of the faculty member, but they started taking it to the next level. Now, some are always still kind of courses being learned by doing and hands-on. They may not have taken that time because ultimately, the best for them is to be back in the room where they teach, in that lab, wherever, doing those things. And certainly, I understand that as well, because there's a level of we have to make sure that students can continue in their learning.
Yeah, I mean, these are obviously issues that you've given a lot of thoughtful consideration to as both an IT leader and as a teacher yourself. And I was very interested to hear what you said when I asked you about lessons learned or takeaways you'd like to share. You said to me, "I'm not sure what I've learned yet," which is very different than what I've heard from other people when I asked this question. Can you elaborate on that for our listeners?
Yeah, that question is hard for me because what time does is it gives you perspective, and we're not out of this yet. It still is very much a very tactical existence, and it's hard to be strategic when you don't know what the end is going to look like. Right. Let me give you an example. We started with a testing compliance program in spring for students who were on campus at that time. And that compliance program was making sure that you tested within the guidelines of what was required, or you actually didn't have access to campus resources until you were back in alignment with the testing requirement. Okay, well, summer comes and it gets a little quiet on our campus, but fall hits. Well, what happened from the end of spring to the summer is vaccinations. At least the age groups of our students, it was far towards the end of spring before they could get vaccinations. So now we don't want to do a testing program for those that are vaccinated. So the parameters of that program changed so that everyone who's vaccinated could be exempted from the compliance program right away. So we know, for example, boosters could be coming. We hear everyone, we hear risk categories. We're not quite sure if that program could change again. With coming back to campus, there's a faculty and staff component to this as well. So, the bottom line is we just don't know what's coming next, and we don't know when it will end or what the end looks like. I liken it to when football players are doing drills. They're always supposed to be on the balls of their feet so they can go left, right, forward, back, wherever they need to go. And right now, we are just still standing on the balls of our feet, waiting to go left or right. We're just not out of it yet, out of the stage. So I'm really not sure what I've learned. I've decided not to answer that because my learning keeps changing. I'll call you when I know.
I look forward to that, but I think it's a very honest and insightful answer. And so all of your observations and experience shared here, I'm sure they'll resonate with many of our listeners. So thank you so much for sharing that, Alison. And thanks so much for being our Tambellini Group podcast guest today.
Thank you so much for having me.
Well, that concludes this month's episode of Tambellini's Top of Mind podcast. Don't forget to check out our other episodes, blogs, and resources at thetambellinigroup.com.